Sara and Tony grew up under the same roof but didn't see each other as more than neighbors. They were both children of hardworking families. Their parents believed in routine, in survival, but rarely in joy. Tony's father spent his days repairing boats that no longer floated. Sara's mother cooked meals that tasted like duty, not love. Life in the village was safe but empty. But life has a strange way of bringing people together when the world falls apart. The river had been rising quietly for years. No one spoke about it anymore. It was as if ignoring it would keep them safe. But the water didn't care about silence. It grew bolder, creeping into fields, stealing crops, drowning memories. One night, after heavy rains, the river roared like a wild animal. The villagers panicked, running to save what little they had. Tony and Sara found themselves in the same flooded streets, pulling neighbors from the mud, carrying crying children, comforting the lost. It was in those hours of chaos that their eyes met, not as strangers, not as villagers, but as two souls searching for something more. They worked side by side, their hands blistered, their hearts pounding, and something changed between them. They didn't speak of love yet. They barely spoke at all. But love doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it begins with shared pain, with quiet glances in the middle of a storm. Max, Tony's old dog, was always by their side. He wasn't the bravest dog, nor the smartest. But Max had something the villagers had lost, endless faith. Even when the world seemed to drown, Max wagged his tail, barked at the rising sun, chased after shadows as if daring them to try harder. Days turned into nights, and Sara and Tony kept fighting the river. The villagers watched them but didn't join them. Fear kept them still. They had learned to sit quietly, to let the storms pass, hoping someone else would do the hard work. Sara got angry. Angry at the village. Angry at the world. Angry at Tony, sometimes. She shouted into the wind. She cried when no one saw. But every time she broke down, Tony stood next to her, silent, steady, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Max, too, never left her side. One day, when the sky looked like it might tear apart, the river rose higher than ever before. The villagers sat inside, closing their doors, pretending not to hear the water pounding at their walls. But Sara refused to sit still. She ran into the streets, screaming for help, for anyone to stand with he. Together, the village fought the river that night. They battled with everything they had. Their hands bled. Their backs ached. They sang songs they barely remembered, songs of hope, of days when they weren't so broken. When the morning came, the river had stopped. The village stood. Exhausted, muddy, but alive. Sara and Tony sat by the riverbank, their hands entwined, their faces tired but filled with something they had never felt before. Love wasn't a sudden thing for them. It wasn't born out of fireworks or grand gestures. It grew slowly, like the sun rising after a long night. It grew through struggle, through pain, through faith. Max curled up beside them, tail wagging softly, like he knew the hardest part was over. From that day, Sara and Tony were no longer just villagers. They became the heart of the village. They rebuilt the homes, replanted the fields, reopened the school. They taught the villagers how to stand up, how to believe again, how to face the river, not with fear, but with courage. Their love became the foundation of a new life. It wasn't perfect. They argued over little things. Sara would get restless, Tony would get lost in his thoughts. But they always found their way back to each other. They learned that love wasn't about always agreeing, but about never leaving. Years passed. They had children who played by the river, who listened to the stories of the great flood, of the night the village chose to live. Max grew old, but he stayed long enough to see the village find its soul again. Tony and Sarah's love story wasn't one of fairy tales. It was written in mud and tears and laughter. It was built on patience, on faith, on the decision to act even when the world told them to sit still. And the villagers? They learned that love wasn't something you waited for. It was something you fought for. It was in the moments you stood together when everything seemed lost. It was in the dog who never gave up. It was in the two souls who taught them that love can change everything if you have the courage to believe. In the end, the river still rose sometimes. But the village never feared it again. Because now, they had each other. They had love. They had faith. And they had the story of Sara, Tony, and Max to remind them that no matter how dark the night, the heart will always find its way home.